Let's face it, as gamers, we're dopamine addicts. It's no secret that the social media industry is profiting immensely off of our TikTok, Instagram Reel, and YouTube short addicted brains, but gaming has also been doing it to us for years. There's a reason Marvel Rivals makes it so easy for you to limit your downtime by hitting that gorgeous one more round button.
Oh, it's beautiful.
For now though, let's refrain from hitting that button and think about how we can help our brains out of this dopamine pit we have dug for ourselves. Big disclaimer here, I am not saying that you should stop gaming. I personally love gaming and don't plan to stop anytime soon, but this video should hopefully help you find some more enjoyment in it. So let's start with the science. As we play video games, our brains release dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that generates the feeling of pleasure. When we're younger, because of how much dopamine video games release, we quickly learn to associate them with pleasure, leading us to want to play games more and more. A study from the 1950s showed that rats with a device hooked up to their brains that stimulated their dopamine pleasure pathways would press the lever as many as 7,000 times per hour. The one more round button in Marvel Rivals is our own personal dopamine lever.
Pull the lever, Kronk. Wrong lever!
Video games are what the psychiatric times call high dopamine activities, or HDAs. Over months and years, our brains get used to the high level of dopamine that video games generate, causing us to develop a tolerance to our natural dopamine. And this tolerance means that we need more and more dopamine to get the same joy as when we played our first game. And this is why YouTube Shorts and TikTok are so bad for our brains. Because they cause such a consistently high dopamine response, causing our tolerance floor to keep rising, which makes normal things, even gaming, seem boring in comparison because it can never reach those dopamine levels that quick form content creates. And this is where what I am going to call the dopamine detox comes into play. The Psychiatric Times recommends that we pair these high dopamine activities like video games with low dopamine activities, or LDAs. They recommend pairing HDAs and LDAs together so that you can stop the dopamine hose that video games open and regulate the amount that you are getting. By reducing that dopamine hose to a dopamine trickle that comes from doing low dopamine activities, you can start to repair your brain. Like a smoker starting lower and lower doses of nicotine patches, your brain can recover and relearn to need less dopamine than you've become accustomed to, which will make gaming feel fun again and reduce the burnout you might be feeling. And so the argument I'm making in this video is that every gamer should pair gaming with a low dopamine activity, something that requires you to put gaming down for a few hours, days, or even weeks. The purpose of this is to get in the way of the regular dopamine schedule your brain has gotten accustomed to. And for me, that low dopamine activity was reading a book. And no, reading Netflix subtitles or words at the bottom of a YouTube video unfortunately do not count as reading. And I want to clarify, I hated reading as a kid. I avoided it at all costs. My brother and I had a DS, and I would lay in bed and have it open in front of the pages, pretending to read, but playing DS instead. Because the dopamine hose of Mario Kart was much more fun to my brain than the dopamine trickle of reading another page of whatever book my parents wanted me to read. And another part of why I didn't like reading when I was younger was because school made me do it. I didn't read a single book that was assigned to me until I was 15 when we read The Great Gatsby. And I read that one primarily because I had seen it and liked the movie. But I will talk about that more later. For now, let's dive into my own dopamine detox experience. What inspired this dopamine detox idea is that we just passed Dry January, which is the idea where one abstains from drinking alcohol for a month because they may have indulged a little too much over the holiday season. And the idea of Dry January got me thinking, what if I did something like a Dry January with gaming? Take a brief break from gaming and do a low dopamine activity, like read an entire book and see how I felt after it. And this idea reminded me of an experience I had in college. It was the end of the COVID lockdowns in America, and people were allowed to go out and about and do whatever they pleased, but most of the time still requiring a mask. Now, I had become pretty accustomed to sitting in my apartment and playing video games with my friends, so as far as I was concerned, society had peaked and there was no reason for me to go outside and touch grass again. I remember during this phase, my friends and I were really into co-op games like Valheim and Factorio. And because I was accustomed to my friends always being available to play with me whenever I wanted, I faced a harsh reality when the restrictions were raised and they all started to go off and have real-life experiences, leaving me isolated in my apartment, gaming alone. No amount of calls or texts got them to respond to my pleas or cries for them to come join me.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will
do basically anything for you to play with me. Like, I'll even suck you. They were moving back to their regular lives, and I was stuck, pissed off, and isolated in our Valheim server. Those games just weren't the same for me without them, and I didn't know what to play alone and became frustrated. Looking back on it, I was actually burned out from gaming, and playing with friends was the only thing that gave me the little dopamine boost I needed to keep me gaming. In my frustration, I stopped looking at the screen of my computer and started looking around my apartment. I like to keep books in my apartment to make myself look smart to anyone who might come around and as decorations. My walls may have been completely bare, but anyone who came over would obviously know I was a scholar. However, I didn't actively read any of them, and some were actually from high school that I kept and would likely never read again in my life. But one day, I was bored of scrolling through my Steam library, and so I decided to pick up an old classic for myself. Harry Potter. I had books 1 through 4 on my shelf, so I thought I might just start with the first one, remembering how much I enjoyed reading them as a kid. I remember the evening well. It was Friday night and no one was hopping on because everybody was out doing things with their inferior real-life friends. I opened the first Harry Potter book around 8 p.m. and thought I would read for an hour and then hop on my PC to game, as I expected I would get bored with the book. However, I started reading and was as enticed by the story as I was when I was a kid. I had page 50, 100, 150, 200. Before I knew it, I looked up and it was almost midnight. My stomach was in pain because I had forgotten to eat. That's how drawn in I was by the book. But despite the pain in my stomach, I didn't want to get up to eat. I just wanted to keep on reading. I eventually ended up eating, but I stayed up until 3 in the morning finishing the Sorcerer's or Philosopher's Stone. The next morning, I woke up late, and instead of instinctively turning on my PC, I reached for the second Harry Potter book, The Chamber of Secrets. I read for a little bit, had lunch, ran some errands, and then came back to read some more. The weekend passed, and I wound up finishing The Chamber of Secrets and The Prisoner of Azkaban, joining Harry, Ron, and Hermione on their adventures defeating the Basilisk and fighting off Dementors. If you're a fan of the series, you'll know that the Goblet of Fire is where the books get thick, with over 600 to 700 pages depending on the copy you buy. So I went to bed at 2 a.m. on a Sunday night and left the 4th book for the week. I attended my classes bringing the Goblet of Fire along so I could read a page or two before my classes started or between them because I just couldn't stop myself. I was addicted to the story. I kept reading for several hours every night, the time that was previously preoccupied by gaming with my friends, and by the end of the week I had finished the Goblet of Fire. That Friday night my friends were available and asked me to game, so I happily hopped onto my PC and we booted up Valheim. And it was a relieving treat. I felt like a breath of fresh air had been put into my gaming experience because I had taken a break. This break from my regular gaming dopamine hits let my brain recover. This break to read and do something other than gaming reignited my interest in it and inspired me to buy this little-known game called Hades that weekend, and, well, you can probably guess the rest of that story. But what shocked me was that even though I was loving playing Hades, I found the 5th Harry Potter, The Order of the Phoenix, calling out to me. So I googled the nearest used bookstore and found that they had the last 3 books in stock and bought them. I enjoyed them over the next few weeks as much as I enjoyed the first 4, but I had a much more balanced relationship with gaming and reading as hobbies because when I got bored or tired of one or the other, I would just switch from gaming to reading or from reading to gaming. I traded between reading about the gang's journey to destroy the Horcruxes and defeat Voldemort and playing as Zagreus through his quest to escape the depths of Tartarus and reach the surface. Reading gave me a productive way to complement gaming, and this perfect symbiotic relationship between the two is probably why Harry Potter is one of my favorite book series of all time and Hades is one of my favorite video games of all time. And it is a main reason behind why I made the other video that I'm putting up on the screen. Now, it doesn't have to be reading. It can be any low dopamine activity like learning a new piece on a musical instrument, painting or drawing a new idea you have, or making a YouTube video so the internet can know how much you love the Harry Potter books. But I want to say, don't disregard reading. I know I developed a hatred for reading when I was younger because school made me do it. As I said, I didn't read a single book that was assigned to me until 10th grade when we read The Great Gatsby, and this was primarily because I had seen and liked the movie. I always used Spark Notes for it, or my one friend who actually liked reading, and this is because what I was forced to read at school felt so boring, I assumed all reading was boring. But that's not the case. I remember as a kid, I read the Percy Jackson Harry Potter and Artemis Fowl books books and absolutely loved them. I was even more glued to the Harry Potter books when I reread them in college than I was as a kid. It wasn't until school started to take up more and more of my time and forced me to read as homework that I started to dislike it. It took away precious gaming time. Mrs. Stipple would be so upset with me, but what kid wants to read The Heart of Darkness? Important literature, yes, but ungodly boring as a kid who hated reading. It also probably didn't help that I was semi-illiterate in complex literature because, as I said, I actively avoided reading what they assigned, so the books with bigger words just made me feel dumb. But getting back to the point, I forgot how fun reading really was, and maybe you have too. And recently I picked this back up, looking to do my dry January from gaming. A few books that I read and would personally recommend are Ender's Game, The Witcher series, and if you want to learn something about medicine, Atul Gawande's Being Mortal and Complications. These last two make medicine interesting and easier to comprehend. But my biggest recommendation is any books that you loved as a kid, because these books are usually easier reads for us that we loved, and it's a great way to ease yourself into the habit. It's so interesting to reread the books I used to love when I was younger and see how I remember them differs from how I interpret them as an adult. The nostalgia adds to the experience and makes it feel like an exploration of both the book and my childhood. For me, reading breaks the sometimes monotonous, frustrating rhythm that I can get into when I'm playing video games. It breaks up the high dopamine schedule my brain can get on, which causes me to feel burned out and unsatisfied with gaming. I personally need the baseline level of dopamine from low dopamine activities like reading to remind me how much fun gaming actually is. Reading allows me to explore these beautiful, thought-provoking stories that took someone years to write and then go absolutely rot my brain playing Marvel Rivals with my friends. It's a beautiful balance and one that I encourage you to try. Read a book, even if it's an easy read from your childhood, and see how you like it. Or try another low dopamine activity that you've been wanting to, but that gaming has been keeping you from. You might just find the perfect escape you need from video games to re-spark your interest in gaming like I did. If you liked the video, please give it a like and a comment. It really helps the algorithm out. And if you want to hear me talk about more things I find interesting, subscribe to the channel. Currently, I'm just trying to get to 500 subs, and every sub helps. Same for my Twitch channel, which I'm currently linking somewhere in the video right now. Until next time, take it easy and read on.